So here's the thing. If you're looking to level up your cash, influence, and autonomy, the team you started with may not be the same team that will get you to your final destination. So before we dive into today's session, I want to let you know about our upcoming free masterclass. This is a closed-door session where I will help you learn how to discover treasure in your business as I teach you the secret to unlocking scalability through the magic of a high-performing team. Join me for 90 powerful minutes to rewire your CEO mindset to accelerate your impact with a deeper sense of certainty and clarity around your people plan. I'll share with you my Fortune 500 strategies so you can learn how to attract, retain, and accelerate profit and performance in each and every employee. Head over to www.klcconsultants.com/dream team for more info. I'll see you there. Hi there. Welcome to the Fierce Factor podcast. I'm your host, Kaeli Lindholm. And I think it's time for us women to shift the conversation in business and step into our feminine leadership to do the most iconic work the aesthetic industry has ever seen. Each week, I'll be bringing a powerful dose of strategy, sarcasm, solutions, and sass that will rev up your creativity and ignite your brilliance as you link arms with me along our shared path of personal and professional growth in 20 minutes or less. Let's go. Hello, welcome to the Fierce Factor podcast, my fierce friends. I'm super pumped about today's episode for you. I have a privilege to have an amazing conversation with the inspiring and so beautiful and brilliant Alisha Rose Merlo. Alisha is the Senior Director of Professional Relations for Colorescience, where she is a major contributor to their sales, marketing, training, business development, and essentially she's kind of the liaison to all of the key opinion leaders, the doctors and the industry folks who are really driving visibility for their new products. I personally happen to love Colorescience products, but that has nothing to do with this podcast. I actually met Alisha several months ago. She was an attendee of one of our boot camps. And after she listened to me lecture her for 5 days on identifying a gap in the market and differentiating, she was inspired to start an incredible online community called the Inspo Zone. And that's a group in LinkedIn really for the aesthetic industry professionals, reps, managers, marketers, consultants, folks who are selling into the industry to come together, to collaborate, to grow, to inspire each other. And Alisha is just a beautiful soul. She's somebody that I have so much respect for. And I'm super excited for you guys to get to know her and learn some of the things that I've learned from her, namely her absolute unparalleled ability to draw you in, make you feel like a supernatural human, and just love her and want to do anything for her. It's kind of one of her special superpowers. So I'm super excited for you to hear about how she has really leveraged her network, her community, and the value of giving and sharing to others to help her develop in her own career and life. So if you're wondering why I do introduce her as a hot grandma, she is a hot grandma, but I wanted to see her face light up, beet red, because I was having a conversation with an industry rep, friend of mine, and I mentioned her name and he said, "She's hot." And I said, "Well, she's a grandma, right?" And he said, "Oh my gosh, even hotter." And so I thought it would be so funny to see, you can't see in the audio version, but in the video, her face turns beet red and it was super fun. So if you want to actually see that in action, head over to YouTube and catch this video podcast on YouTube. But anyway, enough hearing my voice. Let's, without further ado, jump into my amazing interview with the beautiful and talented Miss Alisha Rose Merlo. Well, hello. Welcome, Fierce Factor listeners and my lovely, beautiful, hot grandma, Alisha, welcome to the show. I've already given an intro about you, and I'm laughing because, first of all, I'm looking at the most beautiful woman standing here, but I was talking with a friend in the industry about some of the upcoming interviews that I was having, and I mentioned Alisha's name, and he said, "Oh my gosh, she's so hot." And I said, "You know, she's a grandma, right?" He's like, "Oh my gosh, even hotter." But thank you for being here, Alisha, Brains and Beauty. And I'm so excited for everybody to hear your incredible story and just give some inspiration around how to navigate hurdles, how to leverage relationships and your network to not just advance yourself in your career, but to really up-level everybody around you. And you are just such a testament to all of that. So I cannot wait to have this conversation with you. Thank you for being here.
Kaeli, thank you for having me. And the adoration goes both ways because our story of how we met, I think, is really fun, and how you've been actually an inspiration to me, and just the opportunity to be asked to be part of your tribe and the fierce factor that, you're creating with this podcast and lifting up other women and allowing us to share our story so that we can perhaps motivate and inspire others really is a true testament to who you are. So I think that that's why we get along so well, because I think at the root of who we are, it's not about ourselves, but what we bring to the world that can make a difference for others. So I am honored to be here. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So tell us a little bit, I already gave a little bit of, the background and the bio of who you are on paper, but maybe you could just open up a little bit some of the layers of Alisha and tell us a little bit about who Alisha is as the woman.
I'd be happy to. And I'd love to share some things that maybe people don't know about my history and bio. So I'm a Jersey girl, actually a Jewish girl from Jersey who migrated to the West Coast after her parents abandoned her when she was in college. I say that just as a little bit of guilt there, but nothing. No, it was an inspiration. How lucky for me to choose between the beautiful West Coast and the incredible and culturally rich freezing cold East Coast. It wasn't that too hard of a decision. I did go back and forth. It wasn't like they didn't let me back in the family until I graduated college.
By the way, because the listeners can't see us, but we're both, exposing shoulders in our interview here because we're in this beautiful climate here in Southern California.
Yes. I have to say it wasn't a difficult choice because I did spend some time on breaks here, but some things people don't know about me is my degree is not really related to what I'm doing. And I think a lot of people have that. So I was studying speech language pathology in upstate New York in college. And when I came to the West Coast, I had a whole list of nevers. Oh. I'm never getting married. I'm never having children. And I'm never driving a minivan. And, those were my mantras. And my mom said, well, can we throw you a party where you would wear a white dress? And I said, I'm down with that. And so, after graduating college, I was very focused, and that's one of the things that I typically am. But the reason I say that I have my list of nevers is because that's really part of my story, is that really the cliche of never say never stands true in my journey. And so less than 2 years after being a full-time California resident, I met my husband. I decided not to pursue my degree. A few years after that, I had a child. My husband and I had our first son, who is almost 24 years old right now. And so I think part of my journey and my story has really been that I came with a checklist, and I'm still that person at heart, but I came with that checklist, and, it served me well, but I also learned that it can also be something that you want to make sure isn't limiting you. And so, when I had that checklist of nevers, and it ended up that, I'm still with my husband, we're going to be celebrating in a month our 27th wedding year anniversary. I think it's really important to note that, in my story, how I started out wasn't exactly where I ended up. And I'm okay with that, because during that journey, I discovered passions that I had that were related. So for example, speech language pathology, right? I pursued my advanced degree and kind of had a life shift and stepped away from that. But I always had that passion for healthcare. And in order to get into that, I decided to go work in a doctor's office. I worked in orthopedics, and guess where I started? the front desk. So I had a college degree and I was really passionate about being in this field and was trying to find a way to just get more experience firsthand. And so that experience of becoming the director of first impressions, as we like to say when we talk to people in our industry, really fueled me to know that I started out in one position, but I never limited myself to that. And I went from that role to being a patient care coordinator for the spine surgeon, to finding a way to be then a clinical study coordinator for the practice, to sitting down and working with med device companies, and the reps would come in. And I said, I can do that job. And so part of my journey was like, I can do that job. I didn't have experience. I didn't know how to break into it. I had no sales. I had a degree. I worked in the doctor's office.
So glamorous, by the way.
But I figured it out, and so it drove me to really pursue where I wanted to be, which was on the industry side of healthcare. And so fast forward 20 years, I've been so blessed to take that drive and that tenacity and throw my checklist of nevers and nots out the window and embrace really what I wanted to become and never stop there. Can I share a little bit more about that journey and how I got to be on this side of the equation of the business?
Yeah. And I'd also love to hear too about that checklist and how it has translated the way that you parent. Is that something that you bring into that? So tell a little bit of your story and then I want to hear more about
parenting
that.
piece. So when I was sitting there as a clinical study coordinator, I would venture out and be brought in by the companies to go over, study protocols, and, they would come in and, evaluate the study, see how it was going. I would get to be in the OR. I've got some crazy stories about back in the day being in the OR, but I really started realizing I could do this job. I wanted to do that role, to be on that side of the relationship. And so I'm like, where do I start? This is in 1998, late 98. The World Wide Web was just really not too old. And the only job board out there was one called monster.com. I'm dating myself a little bit. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to go and apply for every single pharma job in the territory in which I lived. I'm just going to just put together a resume. I had a lot of support from the surgeons that I worked with. They were like totally on board. So they helped me from that perspective, and encouraged me. And that, I think encouragement is really important, that you have people that are encouraging you and not discouraging you. 121 resumes submitted. I remember that number, 121. And I had 2 interviews that I started going through. One was for a company called SmithKline Beecham at the time and their cardiovascular portfolio. So they flew me out to the East Coast. We had multiple interviews. This is when we didn't have like virtual interviews, phone interviews. And then they flew me out. And I was also interviewing for another job at the same time. And they offered me the job. And so my son is barely... that was barely like over 2 at that time. And they said to me, you'll have to come out to New Jersey, which I'm like, oh, great. Pharma Central, right? And for 6 weeks, you'll have to sit there and do your training. I said, well, can I go home on the weekends? They said, no, we're not going to fly you home. They said, I said, well, can I fly myself home on my own dime? I have a young son and a husband. I didn't want to be leaving it. And they said no. So I was like, well, that didn't sound too great to me. At the same time, I was interviewing and offered a job with a small company called Obagi Medical Products. Owned by, at that time, a Dr. Obagi. And I didn't know anything really about aesthetics. I didn't know about the space, but it was very interesting to me. And it was skincare. So you were dealing with like the same anatomy that I worked with, right? The facial anatomy that I worked with in school. And I said, how long is your training? They said 5 days in Kansas City and then we'll set you out in the field. I'm like, sold. And so I took that role and I never looked really back from our space with one little kind of jump into another area that was still really a cash pay experience. And it really was eye-opening to me to be able to have that gut and grit and tenacity and being able to be offered things that looked great, but then making that decision with always kind of my family and my life in mind was so important.
Right.
So parenting, how does that checklist apply for parenting? Well, I was only blessed with one son, so I really had a lot of chances to get it wrong, right? Usually a lot of people say when they have two children, the first one is kind of like the learning, and then the second one, is you get all the experience or the wisdom of experience. I think that having a checklist for raising a child is not always to an advantage. They don't fit into a box. They don't fit into exactly what you would think. So although I always had a framework of the vision of how I wanted my son to behave and act, and he was always so great, and he wasn't what at times I thought my expectations should be. So I really learned, I think, the lessons of being flexible and loving people where they're at and trying to be encouraging. But I went through a lot of trial and error. And my son didn't take the path that I would have picked for him. He took a military path, which was where his heart was. And he's actually finishing up his service. And from this recording of this podcast, in 9 days, we'll be home.
Wow.
It's really exciting. So I think that learning, as a parent also, you can have a checklist and you can have expectations, but you also have to know that when they're not met, it's not the end of the world. And sometimes it felt like it was. But, I've learned a lot of lessons about giving up control in certain areas, and that has translated, I think, over to relationships in life and in my work life too.
Right. I had a conversation with my older son the other day. He's 11 and he got invited to go on a trip. And we really wanted for him to be able to go with his friend. And my husband and I talked and he was like, my gut saying, I'm just not comfortable with it, and it just blew his mind. Like his world was rocked that he couldn't go. And I was trying to explain to him, like, we don't get a rule book on parenting, right? There's no guide. Like we just have to trust ourselves and our guts and go with our flow. And, control is something, an illusion anyway, but I'm with you on that, having to, I have to work on that all the time. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about what are some of the biggest hurdles that you feel like you have had to overcome to become, the woman that you are today?
When I think about hurdles, I think there's two types of hurdles. There's the ones that we put upon ourselves, like they're intrinsic, right? They're all the ones that we have in our self-limiting beliefs and how we talk to ourselves and imposter syndrome and all of those. Are we underqualified? Is somebody going to find me out? So I think for myself, I fell prey to a lot of that, am I really qualified? Can I do this? Right? So that self-doubt or that negative self-track was things that every time I approached something that was new or foreign, I had to have that conversation internally. And a lot of us go through that. And even to this day, with all the things that I've said yes to when I didn't know and pushed through that barrier that I put for myself, it is still something that pops up as the first thought, like, can I really do this? Are you really qualified? Are they serious when they asked you to be on a Fierce Factor podcast? I was like, oh my goodness, what if I talk about myself and all of a sudden it's revealed that I'm not the person that people think I am? It's almost like that dream, Kaeli. Yeah. Have you had the recurring dream? It's very, Freudian, when you're like naked in the hallway in front of your high school locker and all of a sudden, you're like vulnerable. Yeah. So I think yeah, exactly. So I think vulnerability and overcoming and how to use that in a good way, but it's been a hurdle and I still have that challenge. So I think those things are internal, right? And they're always something that I'm working on with myself, and knowing who I am and really who I am in God's eyes has really helped me transform in that way. And then also reliving and knowing the experiences and the things that I've been able to do when I pushed through that has helped. Then there's the outside factors, right? The things that aren't in your control. Some of those were, I felt like I was ready and wanted an opportunity and there wasn't one available, like in the orthopedic office. Like I knew that based on education, I was more than qualified to, be the face of the practice, but I knew I didn't want to stay there. And so I would have to wait for opportunities. I had to wait a little while till there was an opportunity to become a patient care coordinator, right? I had to wait a little while till I could get into that next level of running studies. So I think that, just not having anything available, learning patience. I think also dealing with other people. Again, you talked about control is an illusion. You can't control other people. So, I have had times when I had dealt with egos where people actually wanted to hold me down because of their own feelings of inequity or their own, shortcomings. And I've had bad managers. And, I think what I've learned from that is that's not what I ever want to be to others. And I learned how to kind of work through those situations, and they were painful. And then sometimes glass ceilings, right? As a woman, sometimes that ceiling is a little lower. And so how do you find a way to make opportunities happen or put yourself in a position to receive an opportunity through a glass ceiling. So those are kind of some of the inside outside things that I've stumbled upon.
Well, and as I'm thinking about these outside hurdles, and ironically, I have had this conversation recently with a podcast guest we had on here, Dr. Deepa Bhatt, who's a 5th-year plastic surgery resident. And she talked a lot about imposter syndrome and being in a male-dominated space and just having to like keep going and going and going. And then as of the course of weeks after I did that interview with her, women have been coming to me in our community and in my network too. And this conversation has been pretty prevalent, particularly how these outside hurdles, right? Be it they somehow do translate internally in the end. We can only control ourselves and our thoughts and how we respond to situations. So for the example for you, look, there wasn't an opportunity available and you had to kind of recalibrate your expectations and be patient and wait. And right, that wasn't your plan, that was God's plan. Yeah. Like there was a reason, and here you are today to be able to talk about that and the way that helped build the character you have. Right.
The waiting is a good point, Kaeli, because what you do in the waiting does matter, right? So what you do in the waiting and how you try to make connections maybe with somebody who's doing that role or has done the role that you're looking to do or has accomplished that, outside extracurricular activity or philanthropic, initiative. Learning all that you can and keeping your eyes open. So to me, the waiting is not like twiddling my thumb and saying, okay, when's it my turn? The waiting is sitting in that moment and then taking in everything I can to be able to, when that opportunity comes, to prepare myself and learn from others who have come before me.
Right. And I think it's tough, as a side note, not to get on a tangent, but I think it's difficult with today's social media climate, right? Where you're seeing there's the person and then there's the image of the person. And I'll tell you, I interview some people sometimes and I'm like, wow, they were different than I thought that they were, because they put up a lot of front on their social media and the vice versa. No one I've had on this podcast, obviously, but I think we have to be really confident and drill down and have those conversations, like you said in the beginning, with ourselves to say, I'm on my own path and I'm going to put myself in a position to get stronger and more capable and more ready and able for that role or that time when it comes, when the stars align and I'm there, right? Rather than trying to jump and be something else.
And you're going to hear probably today, because there's certain, I'll use the word cliche, but I think there are also certain mindsets that ring true. And when you talk about that and the struggles that you have, there's that saying that life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% of how you actually respond to it. And I think every person listening, and myself, and I know yourself included, can relate to that. When I responded with too much emotion, or I responded in not the right way, right? Or I did respond appropriately. But at the end of the day, the choice was always mine to make. And one of the things that I've worked on honing my skills, and I think this comes just with maturity, because knowledge is one thing, to have the facts and the information. Wisdom is actually putting it into practice, right? And having that experience. And I think that really it's so important to note that when you respond or that you make these choices that are okay, you're learning in that moment too, right? It's okay. You can learn if you have that choice to respond it, and it's not the response you would have picked the first time. Parenting, experienced that a lot. Even to this day, my kid's always going to be my kid, no matter whether he's adult on paper, whether as he is now a father of two, right? So,
right. And I think part of that too, to kind of put a bow on the conversation a little bit too, bring it full circle, is that we can't also control other people's responses or emotions or reactions to the things that we do. And I think that's been a super valuable lesson for me. And it's something I talk a lot about with our clients, as it relates to their team and the management conversation, but also if I'm doing something and I'm worried that I might offend somebody else, it might mute me or limit me from really exposing myself or bringing out my best self, right?
Yeah, I agree 100%. You need to tailor your message appropriately, but you should never feel like you have to censor yourself in a way that you're not being true to who you are and the positive things you're bringing to a situation or a client or a friend or a family member.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about how you have And I know you don't even see it yourself because this is just embedded in who you are, but from somebody who has witnessed you and really we've become friends through this same process, you are a master at what I would call networking, right? And you are a people connector. You are somebody who values relationships, and you genuinely put priority in your life around, you think first about the people that you deal with and how to elevate them. And it's kind of a long way of saying this, but it's a very rare quality to find in people these days, honestly. It's a fast-paced environment. We're all doing 10 billion too many things in our day. We're under a lot of pressure, particularly now in this COVID climate. And I have seen you just like step up and step up and step up and really, started this Inspo zone on LinkedIn. You're a master at building community. And so I think for the people who are listening to this and know that, look, I'm trying to do everything I can to meet people on social media. And, God bless, like all these digital platforms really makes it available to us. But I want you to share a little bit more about your thought process and your mindset behind building your network and your community, and how you have not only been able to help other people rise, but how those relationships that you forged through that process have helped elevate you in your career as well and life.
Well, first of all, that's a huge compliment. Thank you. And it's in my DNA. And it's something I feel like you tap into your purpose. I subscribe to the thought of spiritual gifts. Mm-hmm. And, it really took some uncovering to understand what my spiritual gift was, because I really wanted it to be something else that I thought it wasn't. I wanted to have the leadership. That's my great one thing. Now people will say, no, you're a great leader. But really at the core, my spiritual gift is encouragement. And there's a lot of ways that translates to it. But I think it also is really powerful to have that in relationships and building your network, and how you can always, to your point, I'm always thinking about not just what I can get from somebody else, but what connecting with them will bring value to that other person is always what I'm leading with in my mind. And I know that as part of a relationship, when it's truly good, there is a give and a take in there. Maya Angelou has that famous quote, right? Here we go again with saying something, but she says, people forget what you did. They may forget what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. And so that has resonated with me quite a bit, that I would always want somebody in any type of relationship, whether it's messaging them because they're in my network of several thousand people on LinkedIn, and it gives me a cheat that it's their birthday or they got a promotion, and I take that time and I send them not just the routine happy birthday, click the suggested text, but then I'll find a gift that says it and I'll say, enjoy your special day, and I'll add something different, because I want them to, even if I don't deal with them on a regular basis and they're not like in my circle, like we became suddenly to, talk more consistently, that they'll remember that I gave them a good feeling or I gave them a shout out. So using networking, I think, is really important. And it's always coming from, you give something to them and there's somebody is demanding your attention, and there's no quid pro quo in it either, because people can see through that, I think. Mm-hmm. I also had a learning when I was at Medisys for 10 years. Again, I grew up there really professionally. And I think your professional life impacts your personal life. And we used to do a survey, like an annual customer survey with this group called the Hayes Group. And our general manager at the time, his name is Vince Eppolito. He's still in the business. And he would review the survey and he would say, we just want to delight our customers. We want to delight. We don't want to satisfy them. And I was like, that's a great word. He's like, we want to make their socks go up and down. I'm like, ooh, I like that even better. Like, how do you make somebody's socks go up and down? But it sounds really like a pretty good beat. And in that survey, the other thing that I had taken to heart, because it came from the voice of somebody who we were supposed to be serving, right, as a customer, was the number one thing that was most important when their relationship with the company was following up on commitments. Mm-hmm. So in networking, when you connect with somebody and you want to do something with somebody, I have always made it my mission to follow up on commitments. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a phone call, it's an email, it's I'm sending you something, I'm sharing something, there's an opportunity. So in networking, obviously reaching out for what you can do for other people, and they will remember it. And ultimately, when it's time that they may be able to do something for you, they're more likely to consider it. It's following up and just doing what you said. It's not that hard. And I think in the busy world, like you said, we're so busy, there's a million things. It's easy to forget, but I'm intentional about that. And then a lot of it is listening. So I'm a high extrovert. I love speaking. And sometimes when you love to talk and you have so much to say, you're only thinking about what you're saying and not listening.
Right.
And so God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? The ratio makes sense. You should be listening twice as much as you're speaking. And I think that's also helped in my networking, being a listener. So making that connection, seeing what I can do to serve them, wanting them to have a good feeling about that, following up on everything that I said I was ever going to do. And if I couldn't, I would always say, I'm not there yet, or I apologize, or it's delayed, it's okay. And also listening to them and remembering. And the listening is important because if you hear something somebody shares with you that may not be meaningful in the moment, later down the road, if something comes up and you learn of an opportunity, you can connect the dots and say, okay,
Right.
told me about that.
Right.
And then I can come back to you and you're going to be like, this is amazing. You felt listened to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm bringing something of value to you and I'm following up on a commitment.
Mm-hmm. I think that's just wonderful tips and practice for us in our lives too, right? I feel like we want to make it complicated and it's just the little things that mean the most sometimes to people.
Being authentic, right? Genuine.
Yes.
Like you can tell when somebody's just trying to, gratuitously compliment you or, is doing something because they're trying to get something. And that's not necessarily in my DNA either.
Yeah.
So I think authenticity, really knowing. And if you're not being authentic, I think it's good for you to stop for a moment and say, well, why am I not feeling authentic? How could I approach this in a different way that would be more true to myself? Because that other person will at least at some point kind of be able to see through that. And, you get one chance to make a first impression. And if it's not a good one or it's net neutral and it's bad and they're kind of like, this person is like, fake, then that doesn't really probably set you up for good future relationships.
Right. Right. So we are in an interesting time because now, particularly, we both work in the same industry. And in our industry, a lot of business is done at events, being in front of people, the physical networking. A lot of people know you because they see you on that big stage and you're, obviously out meeting with your clients. And we just can't do that right now. We can't shake hands. We can't hug. We can't have the physical presence, So what would be your number one piece of advice to somebody who is really looking to build their personal and professional brand, but really doesn't have those networking events to be able to go out and shake hands and introduce themselves to people right now?
I mean, what do we have? We have technology and we have our social platforms. So that's the most important. I think that what I have done since having this be the only resource is just making sure I'm bringing value to the community, whether it's the Inspo Zone, which is our own group for, the aesthetic professionals, or it's just in the general community for LinkedIn, for example. I want to put out content. I want to share content, be a content creator, bring something of value, and then bring other people into the conversation where you can tag them, into that. You can create content around something that's a meaningful discussion that you're paying attention to other people are talking about. So I think being a content creator, and it's not just always posting, it's also commenting on other people's posts, liking them, engaging with them. We talked about networking. People remember, you can't tell me that you're not, and I'm guilty of it. Who's liked me? How many likes? I'm at 4 likes. So, I'm sorry, the power of the like and the dopamine effect is real. Right? And it's good to see who's engaging with your content. So engaging with other people's content as well has been really key, and commenting on that. And then even sometimes private messaging them if something was relevant or stood out to you. And then making introductions. I think that's another way that you can network and build your presence to say, I know somebody who is got a job opening in this place, and I think there's somebody that would be a great fit, like making that introduction. Or somebody's looking for somebody to speak, like you and I talked about other great people to bring on your podcast, right? So making those introductions and always thinking beyond on how you can help, again, going back, how am I going to be able to benefit that other person? But social media content is where it's at. Engaging with and creating meaningful content is really important.
And I think not only do you do that beautifully, but something that you said that really stands out to me is the word value. That I think if you're really thinking about what you're putting out there and how it's adding value for somebody, that's really all they want. That's going to capture their attention more than anything else, right?
And I think it's kind of funny with the content type of posts. Like I post a lot of business related things and I, support my company a lot, and I share successes and mentions and all of that. And then I love to also be real, especially within the Inspo zone in my group of people, because that's a network that's really important to me. And I shared a couple weeks ago, about how everything went wrong before I was supposed to have a big day. And, how even though during that day I was doing 2 webcast recordings for a conference, I had other live events going on that I was hosting, and I ended up blowing a blood vessel in my eye terribly, and the computer was crashing. It was like one of those days where I was like, really? Is nothing going to go well? But it was a learning because I just had to course correct. The goal was still the same. I just learned that no matter, and I used the analogy, a rock in a road, which was my image, or the blood in my eye, I can always change it. And I can tell you just by being vulnerable and real, those types of content got so much more engagement and started the conversation. It wasn't just a pat on Alicia's back, but I loved that everybody felt like it was safe and that they could talk about that. And I think that there's a good balance between being human and being professional, when you're creating that content.
And I think also what you're doing when you post that post is you're showing people, we talked about hurdles, right? You're showing people that, hey, I'm going to be a leading example of what's possible for you to overcome the hurdle that you are inevitably going to face today or tomorrow, if it's not today, or if you haven't already this morning. We're in this together. And again, back to managing your mind and the process of overcoming adversity, because that's going to happen to anybody, no matter what color hair or skin you have or what title you have in your name,
And I found it's therapeutic for me, right? It's also therapeutic to put that out there, and it helps me to then internalize with my response and how I react to things and how one of the things, if I could share this, that recently through LinkedIn was really great. There's a physician and she posted something that was a content about creating your own personal brand statement. And she posted it and she said, complete the following sentence. And I'm going to read it here and look down. It says, I am a blank who helps blank. Mm-hmm. And I said, my brand statement, this is great. And when I came up with that, it's something for me that allowed me to verbalize or write down on paper. And it now has become a little bit of a compass. I've always thought it, but I've never wrote it down. And it says, I'm an encourager, a connector, and a solution seeker who inspires and helps others to be better and do better for themselves and those around them. And when you take a look at yourself, that simple activity of writing it out really allowed me to step into really, again, my purpose and what my vision is that I want to bring to my professional and personal world. So I would encourage everybody as they're, looking at, how do you network and how do you do these things, just take a look inside first. Yeah. And when you understand that and recognize what you're bringing to the world and what you want, your brand, what do you say your brand is? I learned from you in your boot camp. Your brand is what people say.
You are your brand, but what I think you want to remember when you're developing a professional brand is that you have a reputation and people are going to talk about you behind your back. So you really need to think and know what you want to be known for.
Yeah.
Right. So we're going through this exercise. I think that's the first step, Alisha, you hit the nail on the head. I'm working with clients on helping them understand what their vision is for their business and their value system so that they can bring the right people in and guide everybody in the right direction. But if they don't know what they want, if they don't know who their personal brand is, it's a moot point. Why do you do what you do? Who are you? Right?
And you have to be okay with knowing who you really are and what your personal brand may not be who you think you are. Mm-hmm. Right? So we talked about this, and I have had experiences in my professional life where I thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. I actually thought I was going to be a Kaeli Lindholm. Nobody could be a Kaeli Lindholm, but that was like, I had left after 10 years of experience at one company where I was able to do kind of consulting activities. And I thought, my lovely parting gift once it was acquired, I would start my own company. And I thought, this is it. I've made it. I'm my own business owner. I'm an entrepreneur. And I realized that, yes, I could do it, which was great, but I didn't love it. And so when you think about the expectations you have for yourself, and you find when you get there to reach that moment in time, and it's not all that you thought it would be, or you really actually don't like it, and it's not a fit for you, you have to be okay with that. And I struggled with that for a long time. I thought I was a failure. And it took some really good, deep kind of, introspective look about what is failure and what did I learn from that, and really be okay with knowing that, I enjoy working for a company. I enjoy being a part of that team. I enjoy supporting the vision of an organization that I align with, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and you have carved a role for yourself, basically, ultimately, that gives you the opportunity to live your purpose, to connect and encourage and inspire people. And you can do that many different ways. It doesn't have to be that one way that you thought you planned you were going to go. I know we have a lot of physicians who listen to this podcast who they got on a path and they had to commit and put a lot of time and money and resources and investment into going down one path and then find themselves like, I don't know, this isn't everything I thought it was going to be or exactly what fulfills me now at this point in my life. And even during COVID here, I had a client who called me and said, look, I just don't want to do it anymore. Like I could literally just go work in hospital now and make a salary and be home with my kids. And you know how difficult that decision was? Very difficult. And it was hard for me, like, are you sure? But ultimately you have to do what's the best for you. I think that's a really special lesson for you to share. I appreciate that.
Of course.
So tell me, kind of in theme of this, what would be the best piece of advice that you would give your 20-year-old self?
Don't go in the tanning bed. Seriously, wear your sunscreen would be my best piece of advice because I didn't do that.
Is that still a thing?
What?
Tanning beds.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Tanning is really, unfortunately, is still perceived as a, kind of a way to look vibrant and glowing and healthy. I had seen some recent articles and discussions about how people are actually like laying out more. And I don't know if it's because they've been inside their house so much. They're just wanting to get that exposure to the warmth of the world. But yeah, if it wasn't a thing, there would be no tanning companies. Now, I don't know if they're open now. I think that they're, at least in the state of California, shut down, which is not a bad thing. But tan in a can is the way to go.
Right.
Anyway, aside from that health advice, I think that I would really look at taking time to remember and recognize the milestones of your life in the moment. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you're on the road to success or what you envision success. And I think it's okay to stop and recognize the milestones that you're going through while you're going through them. Because sometimes it's always like the next thing. What's next? What's next? What's next? Where's my promotion? Where's my next pay bump? Where's my next opportunity? I think that that's really important. I think that what your superpower is. And my superpower was relationships. And I think that could be everybody's superpower. Not everybody will do it the same way. And that if you have challenges, right, and you come up against obstacles or things in your control and not in your control, don't compromise your integrity. Integrity is one of my core values that is so ingrained in my DNA and is a lens that I look through everything that I do. And I never want to, I would say don't ever compromise your integrity or your beliefs to get to the next step or to advance. And then kind of what I shared before, it's okay if a dream you pursue ends up not being what you really liked. It's not a failure. And I think that's a really big value. I was brought up not in a negative. I love my parents. Thank God they're both still living and healthy, but very performance driven, right? Mm-hmm. Like your grades, your awards, your promotions, your money. And those are all things that, can get you the finer things in life. But at the end of the day, when all that's stripped away, I think to my younger self, it would be, that your biggest accomplishments and your legacy that you leave on this world is not going to be the stuff. It's going to be the lives that you changed and impacted. And I can say that when I was kind of trying to grow and in my tenacity and my drive, which is still a part of me, I didn't always put that at the top of mind.
Wow. That's great advice. What would you say is the best compliment you ever received?
Oh, I am a high extrovert. So I think anything like your hair looks nice today is like the greatest compliment. The hot grandma is great. Mm-hmm. But I think that one that it was not too long ago that really stands out for me. I was at last year at an event in Vegas, and it was an industry event, and there was a doctor who I have had the pleasure of knowing for, almost 20 years. And can I say her name? Because I just adore her.
Yeah, of course.
Dr. Amy Taub, who is a thought leader in dermatology. She has practices in the Chicago area. And we were at this networking type of event that was put on by a company, and we were at the food line, like the buffet, it was like a networking break. And so we were there, and I was talking with her, and there was one of the speakers there. And to me, a stranger is a friend or an influencer or somebody I can help that I haven't met yet, right? Like that's my mantra. And so I just started talking to this gentleman, and she's just watching me, and she's a little bit more quiet, right? So not everybody is an extrovert, right? Some people are more, internalized, and there's no wrong or right about it. And she just looked at the gentleman after I came up for air from talking. And she just looked at the gentleman, looked at me, and she goes, "She just draws you in, doesn't she?" And I was like, I literally was so touched by the simplicity of that, because I didn't mean it like I was like some sort of like hocus pocus, hypnotizing person, but that she just spoke so authentically about how I truly love making people feel like I want to draw them in to a positive experience. And I just paused and I looked at her, and I just had to hug her when, we could do that back then. And I just had to hug her, and all I did was just say thank you. And that's another thing. We as women don't say thank you when we're complimented. And I'm guilty of it, but I've made a conscious effort, and I do this with the younger women in my life. I have a 23-year-old daughter-in-law who I just adore and love, and I'm blessed to have a great relationship with her. But to the point of when we do receive a compliment, we always try to self-deprecate right after it. Yeah. Oh no, I look terrible. Oh my goodness, I don't know, I feel awkward. We always take that compliment and turn it.
Oh, I know that's great, but yeah.
And I just said, just say thank you. You don't have to go on and brag about it. You could just look at that person and just show appreciation for what they just shared with you that was meaningful to them. And I think that thank you and that gratitude is so simple and pure. It doesn't even have to be any more than that.
Mm-hmm. I love these really simple lessons that we kind of just need to be schooled on a little bit, to remember that we're in a way thinking about ourselves and not thinking about how to respect and offer appreciation for that other person who is going out of their way. That is a beautiful compliment, though, and I couldn't agree more. You have a magnetic charisma, no question. So I'm not surprised about that story.
Thank you.
So Alisha, tell us what's next. What are you working on now? Because I know you are a high achiever. I know you're grounding us all back to our core principles and giving us the thoughts around developing our personal brand here and making sure that we think about the little things and adding value for people. But I know you, and you always have big dreams, and you know how to make them happen. And so I'm dying to hear, what's going on in Alisha's head right now.
I think priority-wise, I think what's most important is me spending time with my grandchildren. That's like what's now, what's next, and what's forever. But I say that because it's something that is so important to me. And I have the blessing of having them. They're going to be living with us. And that's a gift. So I have, a 6-month-old and a 2-year-old that I can love on and pour the love that God has for them and all this life have an offer to those children. So that's like a top priority for me and what drives me. And again, everything that I do is a reflection upon that they're watching and they're seeing and they're learning. So I just want to pour life's love and lessons into them, number one. Number two is always finding ways to help and encourage others. So the Inspo Zone, which we've talked about quite a bit, is this private group. And I'm really trying to figure out what's next for that. I want it to be something that people really turn to when they're looking for that development and growth. So I'm really figuring out strategies in that focus. And that's a passion project for me. Professionally with my company, I'm really doing all I can to share with the world, healthcare professionals and dermatologists and plastic surgeons, how incredible the products are. I'm working with the company, helping us pivot in this time. And then something that's been kind of brought to the forefront very recently that I think the Lord has put on my heart, which is part of encouraging others, is really giving a voice more to those that are being victimized in human trafficking. Mm-hmm. Last year, I kind of got involved with an organization called A21, and they're global, and they do incredible things to create awareness and to rescue and help restore those that are victims. And, the day before we did this recording, it was obviously, World Human Trafficking Awareness Day. And I was disappointed in myself for not taking a little bit earlier action and using my platform and my voice. But I was also kind of sad to see that some of the other initiatives that are very socially charged right now that I've seen, especially on social media, using that platform to connect, this really wasn't as prevalent as some of the others. And it spoke to my heart. And I was a little bit shattered. And actually this morning I was a lot shattered when I thought about it. Mm-hmm. And so when I was thinking about this question, because you told me it was coming, so I could put some thoughts into it, when I was really thinking about how I want to spread, that was just on my heart, that I want to do more there. And I always feel like when you bring something and you go to a cause, you can give your time, you can give your talents, right? And you can give your treasures, right? So time is obviously time. Talents is using your voice, using your platform, using what God's given you to support something. And then treasure is money, right? Like that's really the biblical time, talents, and treasure. So I'm really looking at right now, and this is so fresh, you're getting this hot off of my heart, is I want to do more in that space because it involves everything about encouraging and finding solutions and all those things that I shared in my personal brand statement summed up in there.
Well, I'm sure there are plenty of listeners who would appreciate the opportunity to collaborate in this forefront. So I don't know if it's A21 or another way they can get involved. I'd love to put the link in the notes. So how, to let everybody else know too, how we can stand behind you and support you through this. I couldn't agree more on the political side.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Absolutely. So my final question for you, tell me, what does having the fierce factor mean to you?
Being fierce, and I had to kind of look up, I like looking at the definition of things. So because I think, your fierce factor, and you've shared with me what it means for how you define fierceness. And so, I actually went to the old Webster and was like, okay, what is the definition of fierce really, like linguistically? It's got like kind of things like being aggressive and being intense, right? And kind of some of those like more violent descriptions. And although I have tenacity and drive, and I am definitely not, don't align with that. But I think one of the things that really related to me and one of the definitions that was just so strong is approach all that I do with heartfelt, powerful intensity. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think being fierce is. Mm-hmm. What you do and the things that are meaningful in life and the impact that you have, go for it, right? With all of your heart and all of your might and all the intensity and all the gifts that God has placed within you. And that to me is being fierce. And it's not being afraid. And it's okay in the moments of fear that you can overcome them. And I believe that type of, ferociousness we as women can have is something that we can embrace, and that you're giving us an opportunity to share our fierceness with the world and what we are heartfelt and intensely powerful about. It's such an important thing. And I'm so grateful to be able to be having these conversations with you and bringing that to other women and your listeners.
Well, and that to me, that is the definition of being fierce. And I think you mentioned talent and treasures, and what was the third one? Time, of course. And I think we have an opportunity to use those to empower, to make change, to make positive impact in the world. And you absolutely are just a standing testament to that. So it's been such a pleasure interviewing you. So in closure, do you have any final thoughts you'd want to leave for our Fierce Factor listeners?
I do. And I think it's really an overrunning theme here that has guided me and I had to learn about, right, is to discover your purpose and walk it out in all that you do. Mm-hmm. Because when you're in your purpose, and I know you can speak to this too, Kaeli, you get a sense of fulfillment that can't be bought. Mm-hmm. And truly, when you're in your purpose, success does follow. Mm-hmm. Like I've been blessed with success, not that I didn't work hard for it or not that I didn't learn and grow and develop, but I think it's because of I'm doing what I am supposed to be doing and applying my true purpose across all things. So don't worry about what the world says, who you should be. Make sure you know who you are. Mm-hmm. And I think that'll give you so much fulfillment. And I think another piece of advice, if I could add to that, is don't be your own greatest obstacle. Oh, get out of your own way sometimes, right? We do it, right? When I talked about intrinsic hurdles or, that self-talk, don't be your greatest obstacle. And if you do find yourself, step out of the way. Let that fierce woman shine through. Make sure you can have an inner circle of people that can help you stay accountable. Yeah. I have a network of people, and I would include you in that too, that I can go to you and be like, what do you think about this idea? Or could you help me here? Am I steering that wrong? And don't be afraid to put yourself out of that comfort zone and talk to somebody you don't know yet, because that stranger could be that friend, that influencer, that mentor that you haven't met yet.
That's a big one. And we all started as strangers, right? Yes, I love that. Wow. Well, you're such an inspiration. Thank you for all of these words. I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to this because I took like pages of notes as we're trying to talk and I'm trying to interview you and learn at the same time. So, Alisha, how can people learn more about you and follow you? Where are you, or get involved in Inspo Zone, et cetera? Tell us a little bit about.
Well, LinkedIn's pretty easy, right? Alisha Rose Merlo. Rose is my maiden name, not my middle name, but
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, the reason was just I didn't want to go to the government buildings to change it for a long time, so I just kept it as a middle name. Now I've been official for 20 years. I've been Merlo, but the first 7 I was Rose. And then I also am on Instagram, so it's Alisha_Rose_Merlo is where, kind of you'll hear me, and it's going to be a blend of Alisha at Colorescience and a little bit of Alisha. The Inspo Zone is a group right now just for aesthetic industry professionals. So that's everybody that's working on the business side. I know that a lot of people that own a practice that may be a doctor or a provider or a practice manager would consider themselves aesthetic industry professionals. And there are tons of resources and groups out there, yours included. Your tribe is incredible. This one right now is just if you work on that side. So if you worked for a company that is in this space, because it was created because we don't have a network yet. And so my vision is to bring us together.
So reps, managers, consultants, marketers.
Yes, if you work, salespeople, marketing team members, those type of people on the side of the business.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, I will link all of this up in the show notes as well, and some of the highlights of what we talked about in the podcast today. And Alisha, you are just such a beautiful human, and I am so appreciative for your time. Thank you for all of your inspirational words and for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Kaeli.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Fierce Factor. If you enjoyed the show, please make sure you subscribe so you can automatically get new shows every week. I'd also love it if you left us a review. And come join the conversation online. If you're an aesthetic industry owner, operator, or leader, please join my free Facebook group, The Tribe of Fierce Aesthetic Leaders, a community of ambitious, purpose-driven professionals who collaborate and share best practices for growth in business and life. I'm honored you tuned in.